Mr. Palmer, Sid Marr from The Australian. In the Queensland Supreme Court, you and your lawyers have admitted to backdating a document, I think, that in relation to your country's right to charge a Chinese company port fees.
Well, that's not exactly true. The Australian only ever writes half the story.
Can I finish my question before you get your answer, please?
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask, was that a misleading and deceptive act?
No.
Secondly, also, if CITIC's counsel manages to convince Justice Jackson that you are in favour of CITIC and imply that you are guilty of or that you have conducted a dishonest act, will you stand aside as leader of PUP, or perhaps resign from Parliament if the finding stands?
And Justice Jackson said he would make no findings against me whatsoever, and that's the reality of it. So I won't be resigning, and that's how we look at it. I can't comment on any further stuff because it's still before Justice Jackson.
Andrew Tillett.
Andrew Tillett from the West Australian. Unlike you, Mr. Palmer, I was in the Queensland Supreme Court watching for 2 days this civil case. Justice Jackson said no such thing about making no findings against you.
Well, that's not true.
Why didn't you give evidence to have a chance to put your side of the story and explain why you removed 2 co-signatories from the Port Palmer operations account and made yourself the sole signatory just days before you shifted $10 million to Cosmo Development? Why was Paul Robinson, your port manager, kept in the dark about these transactions?
I'm sorry, it's just none of that is true, right? And I wasn't on trial there personally. This is not a criminal trial. This is a civil matter. And it's just not true what you're saying.
You began your speech by saying there was no duty more important than the job of media, that it plays a very vital role in democracy. I'm wondering why you've marked yourself out as the only representative in the House of Representatives, the only politician really in the federal sphere who recently has walked out on at least 2 and probably 3 interviews when asked about the sort of subjects that have just come up. Well, why you don't consider doing what a little bit of what Tony Abbott did this morning, what Julia Gillard did in relation to the AWU matter, and calling a press conference and taking all questions on this subject until such time as you have established your position.
Well, the reality of it is that we don't have trial by media in Australia. We have trial by our courts.
It's called accountability,
but hold
Mr.
on,
Palmer.
we don't have trial by media, and the section is that when matters are before the courts, we are not allowed to do that because it would be contempt of court. These matters will be played out in the court, and at that time I'll make an appropriate statement.
Stephen Scott from the Courier-Mail, Mr. Palmer. I'd like to take you back to that court case as well, if I could. How do you, if you say that you're entitled...
I can't take any questions on that because it's before the court, so I'm not going to answer your question.
Well, I'm going to ask it anyway.
I won't, why don't you just ask a question about the topic? Have some guts to Rupert. Just don't do what he tells you from New York. Try to do something. Stand up and be a journalist for a change. You know, don't read off that. Think of your own brain and think of a question of some of the issues I've spoken about.
Okay, you filibustered for quite some time now, so perhaps if we can
I'm
have
not
some
filibustering.
questions.
Well, stop reading a question that Chris Mitchell's given you.
If you are entitled to spend the $12 million of that dispute as you like...
Well, that's not true. It's just untrue.
You weren't entitled to spend it as you like.
It's just completely untrue, everything you're saying. Now, we all know that all those papers are controlled by Rupert Murdoch. Your paper's owned by his personal family. You get directions from the editor. Rupert Murdoch gets on Skype in New York. He's given up his Australian citizen to become American. So you're thinking that a foreign citizen of another country should control how Australians think. I think that's wrong. We know Rupert Murdoch, the cartoons that your paper runs, are a national disgrace to journalism. We've seen that editors be dismissed of the Courier-Mail. It was dismissed before the last election because he wouldn't do what Rupert says. So why don't you try to be an independent journalist and think for a while? I know your whole career is depending on it, but you should try to think. We've seen all these journalists, all employed by Rupert, asking the same question. Now go and ask your question.
Now if I can get to my question. If you're entitled to spend the $12 million in dispute as you like... No, can I get my question out, please?
Well, you want to get a promotion from Rupert.
Mr. Palmer, could he
This is ridiculous.
No, I'm not going to let him get his question out. I'm not going to take that rubbish from you, mate. That's just not true what you're saying. Okay, so if you want to ask me a question about politics, go ahead. If you don't want to, forget about it.
Why did you...
Why are you asking the same question? You're just taking up television.
Yet.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm here to talk about a particular topic. I'm prepared to take questions on
And we're here to ask you questions, Mr. Palmer.
I'm not prepared to take a question other on that topic. You haven't got the guts to ask a question on the topic because it's beyond your intellectual capacity. Why don't you admit it? You know?
I'll get the question out.
Well, come on.
I'll get the question out.
Well,
If you refuse to answer it, that's up to you.
Look, no, I'm just not going to just keep talking while you get the question out. That's all I'll do.
If you're entitled to
go-
spend the $12 million
that's the sort
at
of question,
dispute as you
know,
like,
your friends
why
ask the
did
question,
you
your
create-
mates ask the question, and that's
They
just
didn't
not
ask
true
this
what you're
question.
saying.
Why did
It's
you
just
create
not true.
and
It's just not
backdate the
true.
Port Management Services Agreement
It's just
to
not
justify the
true.
payment?
It's just not true what you're saying. Absolutely not true. So it's just not true. Sorry, it's not true.
Stephen, I think you tried. Thank
I
you.
think this is a waste of
Trying to
all our
ask your
time.
question.
It's
Thank
not
you.
true
Yeah.
what we're saying.
Mr. Palmer, are you so absolutely convinced that Rupert Murdoch controls the views of all his journalists because you, as a billionaire, absolutely control the views of all your remaining senators?
Well, I don't control anyone's views, right? Individual citizens can think how they wish. But certainly Rupert Murdoch, it would seem, does, because he's sacked so many people in this country.